We will now have our Q&A portion with all of our speakers. Participants may also raise your hand if you want to ask your questions vocally. Some Asian countries, many Asian countries like Vietnam or Thailand were praised for how they handled the pandemic, maintaining the COVID-19 cases low. But now, even these Asian countries is having, there is a rise on their cases, and Vietnam is still in lockdown. I would like to ask, our speakers, maybe they can give an intervention. Why did the system stop working? Zakaria, Zakaria, are you there?
No, no, I'm just testing the system. Sorry. Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
so I just want you to ask, why did the system stop working? Why do you think there is a sudden rise on COVID cases in Asian countries like Vietnam or Thailand? Last year we were doing so well.
Oh, you were asking me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I think it's all because of when we start to move around, these things start to accumulate, and it's all about movement. I mean, in the early stage, it's all about movement. The more we stay at home, the less it's going to to spread. But the more you move, the more it happens. It's just like in Malaysia when we start moving and we start opening up places, and if new cases happen. So I think this is just the few things. For early stage, we need to stay at home. That was the advice.
But now we need to.
We cannot just stay at home all the time. We need to move. Yeah.
Yeah. Jens, you are based in Thailand. So there is a sudden rise in Thailand, but Phuket is still open. Why do you think that they did not close Phuket, or even though a lot of places in Thailand are in the red?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, and I'm not in Phuket, so I can't really evaluate the situation. But what I'm reading, and I think we're reading all the same thing, is that on one hand, the government is looking to balance economic development, obviously keeping businesses afloat, and managing the pandemic. So I think they're taking a little bit of risk. Cases are going up. But if it can be managed from a health standpoint, and even though, I mean, obviously hospitals are filling up, at least what I'm reading, I think it's still manageable. And this is also, I think, why the Phuket sandbox is being expanded into other destinations like Samui. You mentioned Phuket as well, Hua Hin. So I think, I mean, it's I have to applaud the Thai government for taking a more, courageous approach with that, because obviously we know other countries, that take a very conservative approach. If we look at New Zealand or Australia, but where obviously tourism is a big part of GDP, and Thailand is a big example, and where domestic tourism is just not enough to compensate. So I think sometimes the government needs to take more courageous steps for that. So I think that's why. But I agree with Zakaria. I mean, obviously, yeah, when things open up, when people are moving around, then cases spread again. And also sometimes I think there's this notion of, if the government says, okay, it's okay to do this, then people get very quickly, they get relaxed. Right. So, I mean, I think we see people then taking off their mask or social distancing, it's becoming kind of like something that's of the past, kind of like, well, you know what, if I'm allowed to go to Phuket on vacation, then I'm probably allowed to do what I would normally do there, So I think then obviously, cases can spread again.
Okay. Thank you, Jens. While some countries in the region, this is from Torn Chanri Tayara. I'm really sorry if I mess up your name. While some countries, Well, some countries in the region prepare to open their border for vaccinated tourism later this year. What is your anticipation on this? How well prepared are they? Let's go back to Zakaria first. When you reopened Langkawi, do you think you are prepared just in case the COVID cases rise?
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, when we reopen Langkawi, there's a few things that we have to consider. First is, what if cases happens? How do we solve the problem? That has been notified, and we have come up with evacuation plans if it's necessary and things like that. But to make sure that we do right from the start, so we make sure that people are vaccinated and fully vaccinated. And then if their families, so we take care, we want to make sure number one is they're fully vaccinated. And then come the issue of, we do not want people to travel anywhere as you like, because you're only opening Langkawi. So we even trying to control that by making sure that they use travel agent services, so that travel agents will bring you from point to point. Or as you wanted to see your parents so much, you stop in Ipoh or another state or things like that along the way, and we do not want that. So ours is, we open in Langkawi just for you to come straight from wherever you are from, whether you fly or with a travel agency to Langkawi, and it works. The cases were very low, and people were adhering to it. And we also have tests where people are being tested, a swab test before coming. And these people, we make sure that they do not reach Langkawi until they are stabilized. So Alhamdulillah, everything was under control, and we were happy with the result. Thank you.
Thank you, Zakaria. Also, I want to share with Phuket Sandbox. Before they opened the Phuket Sandbox program, they made sure that all tourism workers are fully vaccinated. The general population target vaccination was 70%. That is one of the things that they prepared in order for them to reopen. Well, how about Jens? You've been in Mekong countries. I mean, the landlocked countries in Southeast Asia. How do you think we can prepare for reopening? What must be done?
Thank you, Kristen. I think as you said before, I think having obviously a high vaccination rate, compared to other parts of the world, Southeast Asia was lagging a little bit behind, especially Thailand, Vietnam, if you look at the percentages. But I think now it has accelerated again. So, I mean, I live in Thailand, and I've been now, I'm fully vaccinated. And just a few weeks ago, I didn't even have anything booked or no hope that I would ever get vaccinated. So it actually happened very quickly. So I think that's very good. So I think that's one part. The other part is obviously have health infrastructure in place to if something happens, that everything is there, and then also the health policies and guidelines and measurement that is then going down to the operational level of venues and properties, from hotels to restaurants, museums, attractions, and so on. And I think what's especially important is, and I think that sometimes it's not talked about enough, is communication. I mean, you are a journalist, so I think you know the importance of. I would actually add consistent communication. I think that's one thing that sometimes happens where there's a lot of inconsistent messages out there. And I think the key in this time is to really restart travel again, is building trust and confidence. And obviously, if I'm looking to go to a destination, wherever it might be in the world, and I hear different messages, and also I don't know where to get a COVID test, and if I arrive and then I read, well, one person has to do this, the other one has to do that, or this person can go straight to the beach, the other one can have to be locked up in a hotel room for 7 days. All these kind of things that come up. I think there needs to be consistent operation, there needs to be consistent measurements, and there needs to be consistent communication. One thing, and I'll talk about that when I do my presentation, is that actually we now, with our Mekong countries, in collaboration with the Asian Development Bank, we have created actually a Mekong tourism recovery communications plan. This actually is being communicated, is being published next month. So it's basically done. We're just doing the setting right now and the design, and then it's going to be published. So I think this will also be very interesting for journalists, because I think that's kind of defines the key messaging, the source markets, the channels, and how we're looking really to communicate what someone can expect in the region, and what someone cannot expect in the region.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the how communication is essential, especially between policymakers or the head of governments and the media. Especially that one of the challenges of the media is the volatile travel restrictions that can change instantly. Also, we have to battle with unverified sources and fake news over the internet. So yeah, I think that having that line of communication between governments and the media, so that all of the information that are we publish are verified and from official sources, that would be great, so that we can aid travel recovery. We have a bit of time for a few questions from Hong Van. Would you like to ask your question directly to Mr. Zakaria?
Please, yeah.
Sure. I just want to ask you, what do you imagine when Malaysia is opening for international tourism? I think one of the things that all countries got to come together and decide is say countries recognize the vaccine passport, because right now we use so many different kind of vaccine. For example, here in Vietnam we have Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, and even with those three very popular vaccine, say the US right now is still not really recognize AstraZeneca, and AstraZeneca vaccine is produced in so many countries, and and each of the country produce vaccine. AstraZeneca is also need different approval, not to mention other kind of vaccines, say the Chinese one, the Cuban ones. So how do you imagine that understandings and approval on different vaccine passports?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Miss Hong Van. Do I pronounce correctly your name?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, actually, yeah, every countries have their own preference on what kind of brands and things like that. Like now we also have an inquiry, for example, from Russia. They're using Sputnik or something like that. So what's going to happen? All you need to do is just, if it's not in our list of the normal things that we use, just send it to us, and then the Ministry of Health will evaluate and then decide. But most of the time, to us, it's all about, if the international body is accepting it, we will just adhere to them. I think most of our vaccines are adhered by what? UNESCO, what's the international body for health?
WHO.
Yeah, the WHO.
World
Yes.
Health
So
Organization.
if the WHO recognize, it's easier for us to just follow through. Unless it's something unique and new and not in the list, then we have to do some research for that. But generally, we welcome everyone, and we hope most of the vaccines are acceptable in this country. Any other questions?
Zakaria, I have a question. So since since you talk about tourism workers or workers in general who are relying on movement or mobility, I just want to ask an update on the reopening of the Singapore-Malaysia border, since many Malaysians work in Singapore but live in Johor Bahru. It seems that what is stalling the talks between Singapore?
Actually, there's a special committee comprised of these foreign affairs, the immigration, the police from both sides to make sure. I think generally the sentiment is about how safe will my people be when they come to your country, and how safe am I to receiving you into our country. So these are the things that is a tug of war between you want to be safe and you want the money. So it's like, if you want to be too safe, you don't get the money, but you want to be greedy, you will have the the risks of this kind of thing. So there is this committee who evaluate and balance this up. But to us as a tourism body, we have been waiting that we hope there is some kind of agreement and some kind of understanding with these countries. So to begin with, we just start the story by telling the world within Malaysia, we are now starting to move. We are starting to believe that we should move and we should believe in taking care, moving with the new norms, using the mask, you wash your hands, or the sanitizer. When you follow these new norms, well, with inshallah, things will be safe for everyone. Yeah.
And I think it will be good news for Singapore that soon you will reach 90% of your vaccination rate. So probably that would carry a lot of weight.
Sure. So we hope Singapore will look at us as a very safe group of people to go into the country. You know, before that, the news was like too bad, and I'm sure every country will be worried about, oh, we should close our borders. But now, look, we are starting to move by in a few weeks' time. We'll be moving around like, you know, like usual. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, life goes on.
Thank you. Wonderful answer. Thank you for your questions, Hong Van, and to other participants, keep them coming. First, I want to Kak Eddie, I want to ask you, since you are from the Asianta, since the COVID-19 pandemic appears to stay longer with emergence of various variants, how will this impact the future travel and tourism? Do we see an ASEAN travel bubble soon to promote tourism in the region? By the way, that's from Torn from Cambodia.
I think the confidence of government to really reopen the borders is really still developing at developing stage. For example, the case of preparation for the ASEAN travel corridor arrangement, which focusing on business travel. The declaration of this is actually in November last year through the summit. But in order to come up with that such document, which is non-binding document, negotiation among countries is quite heavy. I was in ASEAN Secretariat before, so I'm aware on how the discussion taking place, just only to develop a common guideline. So as what is ASEAN doing right now is we are starting with those that are ready first. So we start with, for example, Singapore, Thailand, and we try to come up with identify certain principles from both destinations. And from that both destination, we will come up with a reference that we encourage to all countries that are going to open to really do a similar arrangement so as to minimize all the requirements. That's one. Second, at the same time, we also encourage to reopen the border for their own citizens, because 44% of international arrival within ASEAN is coming from ASEAN itself. But currently, traffic within ASEAN is not happening. Though within Phuket Sandbox, for example, there is numbers of ASEAN countries recognized that are allowed going for Phuket Sandbox, but those countries are not allowing their citizens to travel abroad. So still, I think still struggling on that issue. So I think we need to have a good way to have this. We have already started with 2, which I appreciate the effort, but we need to expand and building the confidence, be it government as well as the traveler itself, step by step. So I think by end of this year could be additional 2 or 3 destinations that will be reopen their borders. But I think we still time to. I think we still have to wait for some time to really have all countries to reopen. I think that's what we are facing right now.
How about you, Jens? You are originally from Germany. In Europe, the European Union have set standard travel measures and requirements for its member states. Do you think we can emulate that here in Asia, or at least at the GMS?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that question. I mean, I think I think we need to recognize that all parts of the world are different, how they act, and obviously we can see that. But I think we can learn from different measurements, right? I mean, I think the Phuket Sandbox, as Eddie said, and I think you as well, I think there are a lot of learnings that can be taken out, and might be able to be adopted in other parts of the world as well. I mean, I think as it relates to Europe, even Europe is very diverse in terms of how the situation is. I think the advantage that we see in Asia is that, you know, when you look at Europe, I mean, here in Asia, I mean, I mentioned before, I mean, I'm now fully vaccinated, but I think just a few weeks ago, I didn't know if I ever get vaccinated. So I think here, you know, if you get the chance to get vaccinated, everyone is pretty much doing it. I mean, obviously there's some pushback on vaccines from, you know, various countries and so on. Some are maybe more preferred than others. But I think when you look at Europe, I mean, people go on the street because, and even also in North America, where they're pushing back on health passports, they're pushing back on being forced to be vaccinated, and so on. So I think we're dealing with totally different dynamics in Asia versus Europe, and I think that you know, is important to realize. You know, so things cannot be just bluntly copied, but I think learnings can be adopted potentially.
How about Zachariah, from the perspective of the government, is Malaysia open for having a standard travel measure with other Asian countries?
Of course, in the spirit of ASEAN, we are all ready to have a standard of measure, because we are working together to promote ASEAN as a destination to the outside world. So I don't think we would like to be left out behind, but we believe in doing it together and prosper together. Thank you.
What are your predictions, Zachariah? I'm asking you this because you just opened Langkawi. What are your predictions, since it is not very long since you opened Langkawi for local travelers? What are your predictions on the rebound of tourism? Do you think that, you mentioned revenge travel earlier? Do you think that leisure travel will bounce back?
I'm very sure, of course, because we have not seen each other for so long. I mean, the tourists are looking forward to come, and the travel industry have been waiting for the opportunity to rebound again. So it's all about, as we said, it's all about mobility. Once the government allows so that is why we start with domestic first, where we allow Malaysian to experience tourism and the industry people to serve the Malaysian first, and we see how the situation is like. We start with Langkawi. It looks like it's a good success story. Everything is under control, and for that reason, we believe to open up more. But once we open up more and we see that domestic is under control, then we look into the international borders to be open. At least this is also while waiting for other countries to accept us to have reciprocal travel bubble. So in the meantime, we focus on domestic travel and hope that by the time that our people are ready, our industry is ready, we really want to go out and also receive the tourists at the same time. Thank you.
Nice answer. Jens, you were unable to answer some of the questions earlier, and I personally wanted to ask you. You mentioned in one of your previous interviews that you don't really like the term travel recovery, and I am hoping that you can share your interesting answer here on why you don't like this term.
Well, I mean, I think when it comes, I mean, words matter in some part, but I think in the end, you know, when you look at the word recovery, I mean, it basically says that you're looking to go back to how you were before. And I mentioned in my presentation, I think, you know, how tourism was before the pandemic with, you know, overcrowding and you know, imbalance. I think there's a lot of stuff we can do better. And I think so a resetting of tourism as a word might be more appropriate. And that's also why, you know, even before the pandemic, I mentioned in my presentation, you know, we've been looking at, you know, balanced tourism, that concept of really, you know, kind of finding the equilibrium and looking at inclusive growth and all of that. I mean, all these things are not foreign, but I believe just the word recovery just looks at a very, you know, kind of like fast and non-strategic approach. Whereas I think we need to take into account, sustainability, climate change, and all these other components to make sure that, we leverage this opportunity now to make sure that tourism is better than it was before.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely agree with that, because we cannot just go back to how things were. And COVID definitely changed even my priorities. If I will be able to travel again soon, like I'm being overly concerned with safety and cleanliness, using digital wallets for transactions. What are the post-COVID travel trends that you are seeing in your sector? Jens?
You asking me? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think, everyone's kind of talking about, more experiential tourism, more experiencing communities, rural tourism, and so on. So I think there's obviously something there where people say, yes, I mean, I want to go back, or I want to have experiences that might not, be the mass tourist experiences. And again, I mean, I think that's on one hand, it's nice. I mean, one thing that I always tell people, I mean, we can look at the what's happening in China. I mean, China was 1.4 billion people. I mean, you have a massive population that is traveling domestically, and so I think not only is a huge domestic market. I used to live in China for 5 years, but also it's obviously a massive outbound market, and a lot of destinations, a lot of travel companies are expecting that China will be the saving grace once it then opens up again. So I think we can see a little bit of what's happening in China, how people are traveling. When I talk to people, in hotels in our provinces, Yunnan and Guangxi, I mean, especially little boutique hotels, they are busier than even before COVID. So I think there is a trend that people are looking to do that. On the other hand, I have to say that, I mean, there have been obviously cruises that have sold out in a few hours, right? So, I mean, I think in the end, and I see a message here that in the chat where someone says it's impossible to control the greed factor and overcrowding. I agree with that. I mean, it's if you run a business, you're looking to survive. You're looking to, put people in your hotel or in your restaurant or whatever you do. So, I mean, it's a little bit harder for an operator to think, around managing that, because they need to put bread on the table. So I think that's where governments come in to really build policy frameworks that on one hand, obviously help these businesses to survive and to restart, but on the other hand, also protect the destinations and manage destinations better.
Thank you, Jens. How about you, Pak Eddie? Since you are from AirAsia, what are the travel trends that you are seeing in your sector?
Actually, in terms of tourism and travel, tourism cannot be replaced by anything else. Like, for example, like meeting, we can do meeting like through Zoom this time, but tourism cannot be replaced by virtual reality or something. They want to really experience whatever destination, or if they go with friends, they want to really see the friends and etc. So I think that's one thing. And what are really hindering for people to really travel is actually now, of course, the requirement is being imposed. If I may use the example of Indonesia, for example, because I work in Indonesia. In Indonesia, actually, in terms of traveling, even when we had highest restriction being placed due to Delta variant, for example, in July, there is no restriction for flights to travel. Actually, they just put additional requirement for people to travel. What are the requirement? Mostly vaccination. Second, PCR test for domestic. And PCR test in Indonesia to travel is equal to pay the price of the ticket itself. So you can imagine, so if you want to travel to Bali, for example, you have to have double price, because first you have to cover ticket. Second is to cover PCR test. And because of that cost, and at the same time, the economic condition within the country, many people are also going down. So the ability for people to pay that kind of price is quite limited. And this is a back and forth, because going out, you have to PCR. Going back, you have to be PCR. So I think the price is much more expensive. But once that price is going down, like for example now, requirement is reduced to antigen, which I think is only, in Indonesia now, antigen test is only $3 for test. It's automatically boost the travel. People are what we call as new normal, actually as if it's coming back to the normal situation, as long as if there is no COVID. Then people tend to forget. I think that's what in the fact. Of course, there are a lot of people that having concern, worry that's on safety and etc. But many people also tend to forget what are they experiencing. Therefore, in Indonesia, there is now police watching all this crowd just to check all this crowd not to happen, because people tend to socialize and get the crowd because they are enjoying by themselves. So I think that's the fact. I think in terms of a situation that we are happening. So in terms of recovery, I think you can see in Langkawi, because I'm also following Langkawi in terms of flights. Suddenly the flight is increasing, and it's also happened when Indonesia New Year holiday last year, where government allow for people to travel, and government provide incentive for traveling by covering the airport tax. It's just simply airport tax, but it suddenly affect all the traffic. And even for us, for AirAsia, we lack of aircraft during that time, because so many people are traveling. And the impact to that, in January and February, we have the second wave. So I think that's the thing. But now we are more safe, because there are vaccination, which I think they reduce the impact, the effect of the cases. But again, even with vaccination, you still can carry COVID-19. So I think that's what we are experiencing.
I would just like to ask you a follow-up question on that, because WTTC said that quarantine and testing protocols are roadblocks to reviving tourism because they make people hesitant to book. And you mentioned in your presentation a while ago that, you don't really agree with quarantine from going back, quarantining of people going back to their home country. What about testing? Once we achieve our vaccination target, will we be able to do away without testing? Or is it permanently here?
I think different government put up different requirements. But for example, UK is planning to get rid of PCR test requirement when they get back to the country. Right? But in ASEAN, I believe the requirement of testing is still there. I don't know when it will be taken out. For example, correct me, Mr. Zakaria, if I'm wrong. Previously, Langkawi also planned to have no testing, actually. But at the end, you have testing at the airport, right? Before you leave, then you have to test first. But for Indonesia, we have testing before we come to airport. That's been requirement since the beginning of COVID. And I didn't see any light that government will take out that requirement. Even now, the government is planning how to reduce the price for PCR tests, other than to get PCR tests rid from the requirement.
I think it is about how the trend goes. When we start, we try to do this. Who knows? After 1 month of perfect, perfect results, so we may realize that it may not be necessary. But it's just my own opinion. But like Pak ini cakap tu, when you said that, I believe it all depends on the government policy. Yeah.
Right. So there is a question. What are the significant changes in the tourism industry post pandemic? Zakaria, significant changes you've seen in the tourism industry?
In Malaysia or in the?
Let's have in Malaysia. I mean, in your home
I
ground.
think in the exchanges, I mean, people are now beginning to understand the importance of adhering to the norms and things like that, making sure of your safety, because people are, because in the past, when we open up, there's always big cases, you know, the moment we open up a little bit, big cases of the, because we may be, either we refuse to understand or we did not adhere to SOPs and things. But now, people are more educated, are more concerned, are more conscious about making sure that we are safe, we take care of people around us, our children and everything. That is why sometimes where there's opportunity to do something that is not right, people choose to do the right thing rather than when there are opportunities to break the rules. I give you an example. Today is my youngest boy birthday party. So I told that the whole family is going to dine out, but my daughter has been vaccinated but not enough days. Then I told her, why not you just declare you are underage? I mean, below 18, because she looks like a young girl, you know. She said, no, it is not about I can go through that or not, but I myself feel that I'm not safe if I'm going there. So it was about the civic of understanding what should be. I'm the one who tell her not to do that, but you know, is the people are getting more civic minded, is more cautious about moving around, especially the young generations. They read a lot and they understand and they know it is not about just about yourself or people around you, and you know, the family that you love should be safe. Like children, I mean, people who have elderly parents in the hometown, they choose not to visit them because they believe that they're the most vulnerable age. Want to wait for the right time when the whole family is okay, that we have. Or else, if you break the rule, there are some cases we heard, like there's this big family who are living in different houses, but suddenly all of them were positive. So when we checked, they came to a same birthday party. You know, things like this, because this news spread and educate us that, you know, if you love your family, don't see them. It's not about you love your family, try to find ways to see them. So people are more educated now.
Yeah, I agree. And we are a bit more responsible in that way. And happy birthday to your little boy.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Jens, would you like to add to that? What are the changes or that you see in the tourism industry post pandemic?
Well, I mean, I think I would agree what has been said. I think in the immediate term, people will place safety and health very high, obviously. You know, so I think they'll be careful. I mean, as Mr. Sakura said, you know, people will be more conscious, which you know, at the beginning that probably wasn't the case, but now I think people have learned that, you know, if you're not careful, then you know, that can harm you and your loved ones. So I think operators, you know, from destinations to airlines to hotels to restaurants and so on, obviously have reacted. But I think what's lacking is that consistency. It seems like everyone is doing, you know, their own thing or their own interpretation, just to tick the boxes in terms of the policies that are out there. I mean, and sometimes, you know, you go to a restaurant, and I think we've all experienced that, where, you know, a waitress that clearly doesn't know why she's doing what she's doing, you know, in terms of the health measurements, is doing something, or you go into a restaurant and you know, you basically you walk through the temperature measuring station. You know, maybe you didn't see it or whatever, or, you know, some people don't, you know, kind of run after you or something. So I think there needs to be some vigilance and some consistency, because if not, yes, I mean, someone may walk through and doesn't check the temperature, and probably nothing happens. But if someone else sees that and puts that on social media, it could affect that business, that company, that brand, and even the destination, right? I mean, as we know, Chinese travelers can be very fickle, and you know, so if something gets into the right or wrong channels, however you want to see it, it could make an impact. I think right now it's obviously a little bit too early for that, but I think there will be a time when travelers will evaluate, you know, if a destination is safe based on what is being said on social media.
Right. Eddie, anything to add to that?
I think from airline perspective, yeah. First, I think in terms of planning for travel, now people are much shorter in terms of planning, not like before pre-COVID. Now, before pre-COVID, you might plan your holiday maybe a year in advance, no? Or maybe 6 months in advance. Now, for short destination, like for example, ASEAN destination or domestic destination, in current plan, most people are planning only week, maybe 2 weeks or 1 week maximum. I think that's one of the character, because they're not sure whether they can really fly or not fly because of the condition or of the situation as well. And the situation will still be like this, I think, for I think years to come, because until this COVID is really totally gone. Second, they tend to be now travel independently in a small group. They don't want to be in a big group because they want to be really feel secure. Maybe biggest group will be family, but I think in terms of friends and I think they try to travel with what they know rather than to have in a package. I think that's the other thing that we also look in terms of this. The third is actually they tend to be visiting more on the outdoor facilities, outdoor like nature, beach. That is to them is much more safer rather than visiting things in indoor. And currently, even within the current condition, also there's also limitation for us to do activities in indoor. So I think there are 3 things that I identify that is happening in terms of travel. I think post COVID situation.
Thank you, Eddie. I think me too. I mean, I will be traveling solo or in smaller groups for a while. Eddie, I also would like to ask you. We don't know when the next pandemic will happen again. Knock on wood. How can we make tourism more resilient so that we don't suffer the same hardships in the future?
I think we can also, even now, new variant is always pop up. New variant from after Delta, then there is new, then there is a variant that really contagious. And even now, they said COVID now can fly. So I said, so many information that we have already. So in terms of new pandemic, I think we have to be really ready. And currently, what we are having right now is really a learning point on how we have to be really survive. If, again, I think I may use in my case in the airline industry, for example. Airline cannot solely depend on passenger now. We have to be really expand or diversify our business to also cover other things, like for example, cargo or logistics. Because once you have a limit to travel, then people start to buy anything online. Shipping, logistic are becoming important, and I think that would be similar situation that would take place even in case because bigger pandemic coming up, which I hope it not happen. But I think that will be things that we are looking at. So we have to really diversify. And personally, also for the person that are experiencing COVID right now, especially in industry, they have to have other alternate of expertise or skill. Because solely depend on tourism alone, it will not guarantee that they will survive. They have to be maybe having knowledge or skill on entrepreneurship, or they have to have skill on maybe financial, on the other thing, which could ensure that they will survive within that situation. So I think that those 2 that I could highlight at this stage. Maybe Jens and Pak Zakaria has other thing that to add. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Zakaria, you are in the tourism ministry. How will you able to be to make the industry more resilient, so that we don't suffer loss of jobs of tourism workers?
Yeah, as we talk about the life cycle of this tourism industry, it involves so many people of many levels and aspect. We really want to first is to gain the confidence of traveling by telling people that, okay, see, look, Langkawi is fine and everything is open, and we must do a lot of promotions to make people aware of these things that you can do to bring your family out, because some people are still afraid to travel, but majority are ready, because the moment Langkawi is open, people really look forward to be there. So now when more destination is open, we have to, while we try to promote and encourage products to be presented to the public and to make the public experience tourism, we must always keep on reminding them safe tourism, safe travel, the normal norms, the new norms, please take care. So if we start inculcating that thing in that new culture in them, I think we should start believing that this is the new way to live, which means you can still go around, you can still enjoy yourself, but always remember, take care of yourself, because if you love yourself, you love people around you. Don't be naughty. Don't try to forget about things like that. That's why sometimes we encourage them to use travel agents, because one of their role is to remind them about the social distancing, about this sanitizing, about the face mask, because some people forget. But now I think most Malaysian are already knowing that these are the tips of the rules of life. Like sometimes you're now about to start the sky engine. Oh, my mask! If you run away and take that's part of the accessories in you. Last time you're like laughing to see people wearing mask. You go and try to be a doctor or what, but no. Now it's so normal. So if you even start your car somewhere, you have to go back home and make sure that you cannot leave your house without a mask. So it is a culture now.
Mm-hmm. Jens, this is right your alley with the pillars that you mentioned before. How can we make tourism more resilient?
Well, I think resilience is created through partnerships and in inclusivity. So I mean, I think from our standpoint, we created various initiatives like our Experience Mekong collection that I mentioned, and other ones where we look to really engage the small businesses and the communities, but also startups, entrepreneurs, together with existing larger businesses and the public sector. So I think that's when you create resilience. I do agree with Eddie on upskilling and reskilling. I think that's important. And also I think it's important not just to be ready for a pandemic that may hit so that people are not suddenly unemployed, but also I think there will be a shift in skills that will be required. So I think that whole process in terms of digital transformation, I think, is critical. But, I still believe it really comes down to making sure that, residents, communities, small businesses, everyone is engaged in that process, and then everyone has a stake in it. And I think that what makes a resilient community and a resilient destination.
But I want to ask a question actually. So especially to Zakaria and by extension to the rest, how are the governments working on this on the government to government level? I know the ASEAN initiative from before that's obviously been derailed by COVID-19. Can I have you guys comment on that? On the government to government basis, the kind of initiative they should be taking?
There has been talks and discussions between governments of different levels, but of course, both sides normally, while they want to open borders, they are concerned about what's happening on the safety part for their people and for this country and so on. That's why these are the only two tug of war, that whether it is safe for us to collaborate or we wait or things like that. But if for Malaysia, we have the immigrations, the foreign affairs, and the tourism ministry sitting together and talking with the other countries on when can we open. But whenever it is, we always look forward to open as soon as possible because it is so good for people, for everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Any comments from Eddie or Jens?
I think for me, frankly, in terms of ASEAN as a group, there is not yet things that come up concretely so far in terms of how the engagement would be. In a simple case, for example, when we talk about the health application, for example, in Malaysia you have My Sejahtera, and in my country, in Indonesia, we have Peduli Lindungi. In Thailand, they have what they call as Mopro, for example. That requirement is still being put individually as a country. And it poses a risk for us to really can support or facilitate the international travel. Because can you imagine that if, say, for example, people coming to this part of region want to go to more than 2 countries, so they have to install this application. That's one. Second, a simple case like vaccine certificate. Vaccine certificate now, if you are outside traveler, need to be registered properly into the system, and it needs, at least for Indonesia, I think 5 days or a week. So you can imagine, just to guarantee that you have been vaccinated, it needs to have 1 week for you to be registered. Why it is important? A simple case. In Indonesia now, if you want to go to shopping mall, I think it's in many countries, you want to go to a shopping mall, you want to go to sport, you have to scan your application. And if your application is not Indonesian application, then you will not recognize. Then you will not be entitled to go in. So simply as that. So they have to be really talking together to all these different applications. When I spoke with one of the operator, which mostly government, I checked whether they have already talked with other countries, for example. And unfortunately, they have not really talked with their counterpart in other countries.
Yeah.
I think there's still a big issue on that. While, yeah, I think a lot of things will depend on this because, yeah, of course, different reaction from different government is creating all of this. So I think this kind of simple issue need to be really resolved on how we can really bridge that situation. And at the same time, when we ask, can we have somebody at the regional, like for example, in European Union, they have youth health, digital health pass. It's one, and everyone can use that. But in here in ASEAN, I think there is no such thing. Because when I spoke with one operator, it cannot be done like that, Pak Edi, because it creates a cross-border data privacy, which we are not allowed to share with other part outside the country. So I think that kind of issue is still happening. So you can imagine how this situation is happening. So now I'm trying as a part of an association. So I try to create, why don't we have a meeting all together? So you can have identification, what required from you, what required from them, and what will be the possible option that we can have. I think that's one thing that we can do as an association. And we will not, I've been criticized by some people that, why don't you wait for ASEAN? I said, it will be too long for us to wait for whole ASEAN. We just start with whoever ready, then it can be a precedent for us and everyone, and other can follow later once they are ready. I think that's our approach.
Yeah, that's precisely it. The conversation needs to get started because it takes time to get consensus. Jens, any comment from you?
No, I don't think anything really to add. I mean, obviously, we work with 6 governments, and everyone is obviously looking to see how they can collaborate. But I think as he said, I mean, it takes a long time then for the governments to really drive that because there are bilateral relationships, there are politics involved, and all of that. So I think Eddie's approach, I agree, is the right one.
Yeah, that's just pragmatic, isn't it? Christine, I hand it back to you. Yeah, I think there's still
Okay.
more. Yeah.
Very quickly, there is a question from Cesar of Temple from Indonesia. Before the booming of Delta variant in Indonesia, Indonesian government insists to opening some tourist destinations such as Bali. One of the program prepared by the government is work from Bali and vaccination tourism. But there are some debate about the policy. People are worried about the spread of the virus. What do the panelists think about that? I think, Eddie, could we start with you since you are in Indonesia?
I think I think correct. There was a program made by government to encourage people because everyone cannot go to office. Everyone go work from home. So rather than for you to work in your real home, why don't we have some encourage you to stay in Bali or in other destination and stay there for long, which I think many of my friends also doing that even up to now. They stay in Bali for months because the villa rent in Bali is now it's quite cheap, so they can stay for long in Bali without having any hesitance. But again, I think in terms of that measure, it helps for certain industry and certain people for sure. Of course, it is not a massive movement. It's really a scattered movement. And at the same time, within Bali itself, there is restriction for people to travel outside. So I think the measure is helping the industry in some part, but at the same time, there's also a measure to really limit the spread of that pandemic in Bali. Although I admit that in Bali, after that Delta variant, the case is going up. But I was told that the case is going up because of the religious event in Bali, where people try to gather, going to temple together. I think that's mostly the cases, not because of tourists going out. So I think that's my response.
Jens, anything to add? I mean, Thailand also one of the prime destinations for digital nomads, and they started this workcation scheme as well. So, do you think that it will spread the virus? This type of policy?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to how people react. If they adhere to the policies, it's like everything. But I think if the right measurements are in place, I think it can be very powerful, right? I mean, I think the first country that actually implemented such a program was Barbados. So Barbados implemented the Welcome Stamp program, and I think you pay around $2,000. You can bring your family, and you stay for a year. So I mean, it was very popular for people from the UK and from the US. I mean, as you know, I mean, UK is a prime source market for Barbados, also US and Canada. So Canada is cold. UK is cold. Parts of the US are cold, and so it's a nice place to just spend a year. And now actually that program is being even extended because what they have learned is, well, people, it's obviously lower footprint. People do spend money, and they don't take a local resident's job. So I mean there are certain requirements to that. And I think that other countries have also emulated that. I mean, Malta just, I think last week came up with their version, and there's Croatia and there's other countries that have done that. But I think, as you mentioned, Thailand. I mean, what's actually interesting with Thailand is there is a Koh Phangan. Koh Phangan is obviously famous for the full moon party, and I think the 3+ weeks when there is no full moon party, I'm talking obviously pre-COVID, the island is empty. And still they were able, and it's a beautiful island. I mean, it's off Samui, but it's a great deal. It's beautiful, probably one of the more beautiful islands in Thailand. But obviously, full moon party, that's extreme. And if you like taking drugs and drinking hard and partying all night, I mean, that's perfect. But the other 3 weeks, basically the hotels are empty. So they actually positioned themselves as a digital nomad hub, and so influencers were there. They open co-working spaces, and I think the piece around that, the learning is it's not just to open up and say like, okay, yeah, digital nomads can come or whatever, let's say, community group, but you need to build then a community to create a sense of belonging, to build infrastructure around it, right? So I mean, if you're looking to bring in influencers, or digital nomads, bloggers, and so on, you want to have co-working spaces. If you want to have more retired people, you need to have infrastructure for that, and so on. So but it's, I think, a very interesting strategy, especially now. And then if the measurements in place, I think they act just like residents, and they're spending money. So I think it's a brilliant approach to bring money in, not taking a job away from a local person, but yet also create some more sustainable tourism approaches, because these people obviously, they want to explore also the local culture and want to be embedded in that. So I think it's great.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Zakaria? What do you think of work from Bali, and will there be a work for Langkawi? Work from Langkawi, I mean.
I think this is an amazing idea. It's a great idea that that will make people feel so much better when the price is low, and you can also, I mean, it is from both sides. While we create the demand, but in the low demand, and you also have opportunity of taking vacations or doing your work at a very lower price. But to me, this thing will work. I think in the earlier stage, the challenge will be the level of confidence, because at that time there's not many people who are fully vaccinated. So like you will feel like, oh, maybe the person that come is not fully vaccinated. I mean, when it was introduced the first time, so people around you are not fully vaccinated. But now, when so many people are fully vaccinated, the level of confidence is high. I think there will be so much takers, because the idea is great. But except maybe now when people are starting to travel and borders are open, it could be more pricey than before. But at that time when it was newly introduced, you have to balance up between cheap but may not be that safe, that kind of thing. But in conclusion, I say it's a very good idea. You work from home in a nice resort, nice ambience with so much nature around you, work done, and you are happy. You are not allowed to move too much, but you're not allowed too much in a resort. I don't mind as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Don't we all?
That's right. Please present me in a resort. Yeah.
Okay. So we already a bit over time. Right. Spot on answers from our speakers. As you can see, travel reporting, it has so many sides. It has so many angles. I would like to thank the speakers for those informative sessions. There are so many interesting points raised. My notes are full. I will be pitching some of these on Monday. FYI, the recording will be available later, so you can go back to it for reference and story ideas. So I guess that's it for us.